Hey Trailblazers and Tarmac Tacklers, welcome back to the Maximum Mileage Running Podcast. My name is Nick Hancock. I am a USCA and UK Athletics certified running coach and certified USCA nutrition coach as well. That's the word I'm looking for, performance nutrition. And it's been a little bit of a while, hence I'm fumbling around. And I'm actually not here with Faye today. It has been a little while since we've done a podcast. Faye is very much still part of the Maximum Mileage setup, and she will be coming on podcast, but she's had a lot going on recently with moving house, new full-time job, as well as her coaching. She'll tell us all about that the next time we're on. But I am here with a new co-host who is going to be filling in when Faye's not around, and probably when Faye is around. And we're going to sort of go with the flow, really. I am delighted to introduce our new co-host. Well, I'm actually going to let him introduce himself.
There we go. Thrown in the deep end. So, hi, I'm Matt Scarsbrook. I am a runner, which I think is pretty much all that qualifies me for joining Nick as a co-host. I've known Nick for several years now, and Nick's been very kind enough to coach me in my previous running endeavors. I've had a bit of a break after a bit of a sucky year last year, but I've managed to get back into my running as of earlier this summer, and I'm building up to a series of races next year, which I've managed to convince Nick to take me back on and coach me for next year, which is the Centurion 50 Slam.
Yes.
Four of them. Yeah, I've run the races.
Wendover Woods,
Yep.
50, Chiltern Wonderland, South Downs Way 50, and
North Downs Way.
50.
Yeah. And I've run them all individually in the past. Actually, I haven't run the Wendover Woods 50. I've run their 50K, which is their night version. So I've run them all individually. What I've not done is run them all in a single year. And because obviously since the last time I did those kind of distances, time's moved on. The kids are a little bit older, but and work and everything. My goal for this time round is not only to complete them, and if I can shave a bit of time off my previous bests, which weren't like going to set the world on fire anyway. So it'd be nice to just feel I've improved a little bit. But I've told my wife that my goal is to be able to be self-sufficient on the run. So I'm not necessarily dragging people out to crew me, and maybe even survive to be able to get myself home again. That would be quite nice. So the goal is sort of like the entire day out as opposed to just the run. So that's the goal.
Good. Well, look, just on the, are you qualified to be on here as a co-host? Yes, you absolutely are, because yes, you're a runner, but you do kind of find yourself around the running industry because you have spent time as a very good soft tissue therapist, and you're on panels with other physiotherapists trying to raise education in the sector, and you're also a bit of a geek as well on the science side of things. So that's another reason why I wanted you on.
Yeah, no, love being a nerd on my science side. I tutor science. That's pretty much the day job at the moment. I work tutoring science for students of all ages, but mostly focused around getting them through their GCSEs. But yeah, went back to uni during lockdown because why wouldn't you go and spend a stupid amount of money on yet another qualification while locked down and not doing anything? So I went back and did my neuroscience masters during lockdown because, as you say, with the soft tissue therapy background, I have a healthy, I stress, a healthy fascination with pain, not one of those weird, unhealthy fascinations with pain. Because fundamentally it's pain that leads people to think that they've got an injury, that leads them to seek a bit of help. And obviously within running, I don't think I've ever had a conversation with another runner that hasn't led pretty swiftly to the myriad injuries we tend to pick up doing this sport, and that tends to hold us back from enjoying this sport at times because we're yet in another rest phase, or we're not quite sure what we should be doing to rehab ourselves. And everyone's got their favorite massage therapist, physiotherapist, osteopath, etc., etc. So yeah, that sort of it keeps although I'm not practicing my soft tissue therapy now, I certainly haven't left that area, and I have, loads of different contacts, but people who I rely on for making sure that I stay on top of a lot of the relevant information. So hopefully I can bring some of that to our conversations as well. Although if every now and again I refer to the latest Men's Health magazine article, which is telling me how I can look like a gladiator, then I might throw that as in as well.
No, fair enough. Yeah, no, thank you for coming on, Matt. And yeah, we'll get plenty of guests on. I mean, this is going to be a sort of a pre-intro prelude to a recording that we've done on the hot seat, which is with Harvey Fortis from John Moores University in Liverpool. He's a researcher in the nutrition side of things up in Liverpool. He joined us a few weeks ago now, actually. So yeah, good to sort of get this going and get the episode out because he came with a wealth of information. So anybody who's listening, make sure you stick around to the end of the episode because there was loads of good stuff that Harvey talked about around fueling your training and just daily life as well. Really, as a runner, it was really interesting to sort of talk about the paradigms between kind of what the government recommend the normal sort of general person eats on a day-to-day basis. But, for most of us that are listening, we're not normal. We're out there running, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 miles a week. And that recommendation from the government isn't suitable for us. There's other things that we need to be doing. And it was really interesting to talk to him. So yeah, stick around for that.
But before then, you've been a bit busy over the last
I have
period of time before your previous episode, or since the previous episode was released.
I have.
You've been doing a bit of running.
Yes. I can't remember when the last episode was released. I can't remember.
It's probably best not to ask.
Yeah.
It was definitely pre some of your big races in the summer.
It was
In fact,
June.
I'm having a look now. June.
Yeah, it was June. So yeah. So okay. So since June, I ran Lakeland 50. Very well known race in the UK. For those of you not in the UK who don't know the ultra running scene, yeah, really, really well known race, the 50 and the 100.
Sells out ridiculously quickly.
Boom, super quick. Well, it's they only open the ballot for 48 hours and yeah, loads of people don't get in. It is a ballot. And I've got in 2 years in a row now, so I'm actually doing it again next year. Going back for another crack because I was a bit annoyed actually because I was in amazing shape for it. I felt pretty confident. The only thing in the build up to it, I had a heart scare. Have I told you?
Okay. No, you've not told me this. Let's tell everyone this. Go on, tell us what happened with your heart.
Yeah, like the most random thing, right? So, anybody who's listened to this podcast will know well that I talk about, my wife and what she's going through with her cancer situation, and with that comes a lot of stress and stuff. And I do plenty of things to make sure that I am looking after my own health, physically and mentally. And just one of the things I thought I would do from a mental point of view is I thought, well, maybe I should talk to the doctor about some antidepressants, as just to cover a few more bases. And I have since been taking them, and they do help. So, but as part of that, sertraline is the one that I'm on. The doctors were being advised by the cardiologists in this area that patients should have an ECG prior to taking sertraline, because apparently sertraline can disrupt certain electrical receptors to the heart. Sorry, the dog's growling at something. Rio, shut up. You're gonna have to get used to this, people, because I have a new dog. I don't know if he was around when the last episode. He's a miniature dachshund and he's a little bugger. So yeah, so I had the ECG and the ECG came back with an inverted T wave, which can show thickening of the heart wall. So yeah, underwent MRI, echocardiogram, blood tests, you name it, like absolutely everything. Went over to Wales for the MRI. But that all kind of lasted about 3 weeks, where in that time I did keep running, but I certainly did not do, what I would call a proper taper into or certain period of time into the run into Lakeland. So yeah, it was all like, right, let's keep my heart rate nice and low. Let's not do anything stressful in case I fucking explode.
The
Um,
irony being that that inverted T wave was there for ages into your training anyway. It's
exactly,
amazing. It's amazing how it affects your mind on these things, isn't it?
exactly. So yeah, went and had all of that. Good news is that I'm absolutely fine. Yes, I have thickening of the heart wall, but unlike somebody who has thickening of the heart wall, and it's a problem because that thickening of the heart wall makes the actual chamber of
Mm.
the left ventricle smaller. I have thickening of the heart wall, but I also have an even bigger um, thick left ventricle chamber, and that's an adaptation from training. So it's called athletic heart syndrome. Um, so I'm totally fine. The difference between somebody who has thickening of the heart wall and
Mm.
it's a problem versus me is that there isn't an issue at all, like nothing at all. So I was cleared, no problem, but I was literally cleared 3 days before Lakeland. In
So
fact,
no ramping, but then you could run your heart out, as it were.
yes, as it were, which I did. I went in feeling pretty good. I felt like so good that I was like, right, I've got to go in for top 10. That's kind of what I was aiming at, um, and yeah, I had a pretty good race. I didn't quite hydrate properly, so I wasn't able to fuel like I wanted to, which did make it a bit more of a struggle. But considering I didn't manage to get myself to the front of the wave, and I probably started in like 2000th position. I ended up 67th, which yeah, is not too bad, I guess. It was better than I thought it was at the time because I started so far back. I could see the lead group kind of like a mile ahead before I'd even crossed the start line.
Oh
So
wow.
so yeah, it was a bit of a nightmare. So I'm gonna sort of try and be a bit more of an arsehole next time and push my way to the fun. No, I don't
So
like
yeah,
that.
I
I think
saw
I'm
some
just too polite. I'm stood there going, oh, I need to be a bit further forward than this, but I don't want to be a twat.
it yeah, I can understand that one. Relevant, I think, for your next race as well, which obviously we'll talk about in a minute, feeling
Mm.
like you want to push to the front, so you don't get held at the back. But I mean, going from the back to 67th is still a hell of an achievement. I mean, I was seeing some chat on the maximum mileage community group recently, reflecting on the superhuman efforts of various athletes and how mere mortals kind of look at it and go, how? And as a firm mid-pack runner, even considering top 100 still seems to me like a massive achievement. So to do that from the back, Nick,
Mm.
kudos.
Yeah, no, I was yeah, but happy with it in the end because yeah, really, other than the fueling, I was running great. I mean, I absolutely flew through. And what a race. I mean, it's anybody who wants to do Lakeland, like it is a ballot and you need to get lucky. I do know people that have entered, a bit like London, 5, 6, 7, 8 times and still haven't got in. Um, it was amazing. Like I could not believe the support of the locals because like
Mm.
sometimes you get these races, the locals get pissed off with it, but it was like the entire Lake District was out in the pubs supporting everybody running past. There was a little bit of nerves running through Ambleside where everybody sat outside at. I think I went through Ambleside about 6 o'clock. Everybody's outside, a little bit merry, or are you going to get a load of abuse hurled at you? But it was like running through a football stadium. It was yeah, the
Oh, that's
support was
awesome.
amazing. So yeah, what a race. Yeah, Mark and the guys have done such a great job of Lakeland. Um So yeah, yeah, that was pretty good. I was running really well. I felt, great the next day in terms of recovery. So yeah, certainly fitness was not the limiting factor in the end. It was probably a bit of a, I think that the fact that I had all that going on with the heart until like literally 3 days before, I was not very well organized when I went up there because it was all a bit of a right, okay, I'm going to Lakeland, pack the van, pack this, get up there. It was 9 hours in traffic the day before to get up there. That was a nightmare. Um, but yeah, no, great race. And then a month later, a couple of days later, we packed the van up as a family. With everything going on with Alison, we decided we'd go to France for the whole summer, and we did CCC, which you've done half of.
Half.
I know. Let's get it
Let's
out
not
there.
beat around the bush. Absolutely, yeah. So, I mean, I mentioned when you introduced me earlier, I mentioned that I'd had a bit of a crap year with my running and had definitely fallen out of love with it for a little bit. And
Yeah.
unfortunately, it was the come down from the half of the CCC that sent me spiraling a little bit.
Mhm.
Um, for me, it was that getting to the CCC was a journey that started in about 2016.
Yeah.
In order to go through all the, get all your races up, get your qualification, then get through the various ballots. I had a place for 2020 that got canned with COVID, and anyone else who may have been involved in the UTMB at that time will know that they then gave a 3 year grace period where you
Mm.
didn't have to go through the ballot. You were automatically entered, provided you maintained your qualification status in terms of
I
completing
should.
certain races. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, 21 and 22 post COVID and life going were not for me. So 2023 was the goal, which you helped coach me for, Nick. And I got out there. I was really excited. I love the Alps. Like, this mountains for me is just where it's at. Um, and I started my run. I was loving it to begin with, but seeming to struggle a little bit with the altitude. And I recorded a a video message
You
to
did.
Nick and my family
Yeah.
as I crossed over into Switzerland, going, I am really struggling here with the altitude. Like, I cannot breathe, and I don't know what the problem is. Like, I've never had an issue with altitude before. Uh, Finally made my way into Switzerland, feeling I was hanging out my backside, and it turns out I had
Yeah, it
COVID.
wasn't the altitude, it was
It wasn't
COVID.
the altitude. It was physically being unable to breathe. With a very heavy heart and from the help of a fabulous old lady who spoke not a word of English, I got bundled back on a bus and made my way back to the start line in Chamonix. So unfortunately, there ended my CCC adventure, and it's I'll be honest, it's taken me a year to get over it. But I'm over myself now. I'm back running again, and I was really excited to watch your journey. So how did your journey go?
Well, yeah, let's get it out there straight away. I did not finish. I DNF'd as well. But it was very much a DNF that I do not regret one little bit because I absolutely loved it. We talked about UTMB on this on the podcast before, and yeah, they have fucked up a few times. In fact, they've fucked up a few times since. In fact, very recently, there's been a couple of things, but whatever you think about UTMB, the races are amazing. They do put the runners first. There were so many volunteers giving up their time to help with these races that they don't give a shit about UTMB. They give a shit about the runners. They give a shit about people having a great experience, and it really was. I absolutely loved it.
The
Okay,
atmosphere. I mean, I've not done Lakeland, but the atmosphere down in Chamonix and particularly on the start line in Courmayeur is incredible. Again, it
yeah,
feels like the entire village is out for the runners. It
yeah,
is brilliant.
yeah. No, it was the support along the route. The scenery is unbelievable. There was one bit I went through in Switzerland where I could not stop singing yodelay, 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 hey, ooh, as I was running. Couldn't get it out of my head. Yeah, just brilliant. Really amazing race. Really amazing organization. Chamonix itself is buzzing. Just great, really. Just the whole thing was fantastic. And felt great. Yeah, again, so this time because my ITRA score wasn't brilliant, I actually started in the second wave, and I went there with a I'm going there for the experience. I don't care about the race, don't care because you told me about the
Traffic jam.
frankly the clusterfuck of the first climb because if I you know quite frankly I stood still for an hour and 14 minutes. I could
Wow.
see I wasn't moving for in the first on the first climb. So there is that, which is a bit annoying if you're racing. But I wasn't there to race. It was only when I kind of got to the top of that first climb, got to the first aid station, and then it started to open up a bit, and I good and started putting my foot down a little bit. And yeah, by the time I got to Trion, about 72K
Mhm.
um, in. I was feeling so good. Um, cheeky wave to the live feed as I left Trion. Yeah, I just felt amazing, and I had a quick look at the tracker and realized I'd again, I think I'd made up 1,700 places from where I was. I was like, I
Which is
got
awesome.
yeah, wherever like 2,200th place at the first checkpoint to yeah 400th or something, and yeah, I was feeling amazing. Left Trion. But unlike Lakeland, I did say to myself, right, stay on top of your hydration this time. But I went too far the other way this time. I stayed on top of my hydration so much that I actually had so much plain water because as you'll remember, as you'll know, there are fountains everywhere in the
Yeah.
Alps
Yeah.
with potable water. And I said, right, every single one, I'm going to stop at, I'm going to get a drink, chuck it over myself, cooling. I was all over that. But I was so on top of the hydration side of things, but that I didn't have enough sodium in me, and I'm pretty sure I went hyponatremic. Only mildly, but even mild hyponatremia can be pretty bad.
Particularly on the climbs out of Trion.
Yes, and that climb out of Trion is particularly savage. I almost got to the top, um, but I was so violently sick, and my hands and face were tingling, and I felt all off balance. I just made my way back down to Trion. Annoyingly, my brother-in-law had actually they'd come out to spend time with us while we were in Chamonix. Yeah, annoyingly, I had some pizza that they had in the car, and as soon as I started eating the pizza, I was like, "Oh my God, I feel amazing again. I want to go back out and run." But I'd already called it in. So
Yeah.
yeah, I know. Again, this is the thing with ultras. This is what I love about ultras. There's nothing wrong with the DNF. Like some people literally it's almost like life ending for them. They're like, oh my God, my life's never going to be the same because they DNF'd. But I'm like, do you know what? It's part of the learning process of ultra marathons. It isn't all about fitness. It isn't all about um, how many miles you do and the plan that you follow. There is so much more to an ultra marathon. In fact, like I would say, getting ready for an ultra marathon, being successful in an ultra marathon is actually more about reducing the amount of things that can go wrong than it is about your overall fitness. Because at some point, your mind needs to take over, your planning needs to take over. What are you having? Where are you having it? When are you having it? It isn't just about going out and running. And again, I've just learned, another lesson in my 19th ultra marathon.
And it is about that learning curve, isn't it? And I mean, one of the things that I reflected on in the last year of as I say, largely feeling sorry for myself over the CCC because I'd made it such a big deal, and maybe that's a learning in and of itself, is that no one race can possibly be that important that it sort of derails, something that I love doing. Um, but one of the things that I reflected on was I've always really struggled to enter races for the sake of entering races. Like if I want to go out and do a long run, I'm on the view where I can go and do a long run for free. Why am I entering a race to do it? And one of the things I ended up reflecting on was, well, actually, sometimes entering races and having those races in the calendar helps because you go through race day prep, which you never do when you're just going out on a long Sunday run. You never go through race day prep. But also because, like you say, things can go wrong. that are outside of your control, but you need to be able to account for, you almost get the opportunity to practice a DNF, because if you fuck up a Sunday run, who cares? Whereas if you've paid for an event and you drop out the event for whatever reason, then there's always going to be that element of, oh, I DNF'd. But
Mm.
I think you need to get used to DNFing to then be comfortable with that idea. I mean, one of the things that amazed me when you told me originally, Nick, about your CCC experience was knowing how close you were to the top of Trion. Yes, no, sorry, on the hills outside, knowing that it's still a bloody big hill, so it's not insignificant to the top, but knowing how close you were to the top, how much you'd done, having the wherewithal when you were ill to turn round and go backwards, like going backwards in a race feels inherently wrong unless you've got the wherewithal to realize that some days are not your day, and
Mm.
then you can compartmentalize and go, okay, that's the end of my race, I now need to move on.
For me, it was a safety thing. It was like, okay, so I'm clearly not in a good place here. The fact my face and hands were tingling and I was off balance
Yeah.
on such a brutal climb. I thought, right, what is the safest option for me? And the safest option was to not try doing the next, there was still 350 feet of elevation to go, which, doesn't sound a lot, but when, you're really struggling like I was, I thought the best option is to just trot downhill. It took me about 2 hours to get back down. Um, but it was the safest option at the time.
Yeah. But I think being able to be rational and make that decision, it comes from experience, I think. I mean, some people might err on it to begin with, but I know that there will be some runners out there who are like, no, I must finish this race. I'm going to push through anyway, and perhaps make a more dangerous situation for themselves.
Mhm.
Um, so I think learning lessons about what it means to DNF, it's become much more important to me since the CCC, because before then, I'm not sure I DNF'd. If I had, it was just a minor race. Now, as I say, I've never won anything. I'm always crawling across the line, and I'm fine with that. But that's always been my expectation: is I will finish even if I'm crawling. And so the idea of not finishing really knocked me. So the fact that someone like yourself can honestly, hand on heart, say it was I don't regret it at all. It was that race. It was
Not
that
at all.
experience. Now we move on. I think that's a massive thing. And as I say, it's come in part of my approach moving forward, is actually a DNF is not the end of the world. Now, don't get me wrong, it'll suck if I DNF partway through a series of races where there's a nice big shiny medal at the end.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But hopefully I'll feel better for it anyway.
Yeah, I think we need to remove that stigma of DNFing. I mean, just reflecting on the UTMB weekend itself, the next day, UTMB, like
Mm,
most of the top 20 male athletes in UTMB, Jim Walmsley, Tom Evans, Sage Canaday, the list of names that dropped out before the morning had even broken was ridiculous.
yeah.
Um, even the best of the best in the world DNF. There's nothing wrong with it, folks. You don't have to worry about DNFing. You're not a weak person because you DNF'd, particularly if there's a safety issue.
Yeah. Wasn't it? It was
Okay.
close to 50%, wasn't it, on the UTMB? I'm having a quick look now, but
Yeah, the overall DNF rate was crazy, but it was the carnage, and that was the word that was used, was the carnage overnight of, the
the
favourites.
big names. Yeah.
Jim Walmsley, he
He'd won it the year before.
yeah, he DNF'd at Courmayeur before the sun had even come up.
Yeah.
So, it's okay to DNF. No, all right, don't call your DNFs too soon. You do need to ask yourself the question. And I did that. I sat there I didn't just, stop and go, well, I'm being sick, fuck this, I'm going back down. I sat down on a log for a good 20, 30 minutes, trying to sort myself out, trying to regroup, trying to see if any of the nutrition I had on me was going to help. And it wasn't. Unfortunately, I just had everything I had was sweet. I needed something
Oh.
salty. And I was just in no, I mean, that climb out of Trion is in the middle of nowhere. There's nothing
Mhm.
around there. It's not like there wasn't an aid station close that I could just grab something from. So don't call your DNFs too soon. Make sure you really are DNFing for the right reason. But if you do DNF, don't worry about it. Like, it's not like we're competing for the world championships here. It's not like we're trying to win these races for the most part. It's for most of us, myself included. I'm never going to win CCC. I am not Hayden Hawks, who did win it. He's one of the best ultra runners of all time. I would have been delighted if I'd finished in the top 400 in the end. Delighted. But I'm certainly not out there to win. So yeah, don't worry about your DNFs, folks. There's no reason to worry about it.
So looking forward then. So I know
Hmm.
you and I have chatted off air about potentially returning to the CCC at some point.
Hmm.
But what have you got planned over the next couple of months?
Yeah, so I am doing London Marathon.
Uh,
I've got a charity place for breast cancer now. Obviously, our personal story lended itself well to that. They contacted me as soon as I applied for it to say, yeah, we'd love to have you on the team. So, if anybody fancies sponsoring me, I'll put the link in the show notes. Or you will, because
or
you're
I will, because I'm now
you're
the editor.
you're the podcast editor. um, uh, yeah, so I'm doing that for breast cancer now. They do some great work to help fund some of the research around breast cancer, and we hope that something's going to be out soon enough to help Alison even more. But because I go out and run these stupid distances for fun, I can't just say, well, sponsor me for the London Marathon, because people are like, you run marathons for breakfast. So yeah, I've actually decided that I need to really sort of see if I can lower my PB. And I'm actually going to have a crack at the London Marathon Championship qualifying time, which they've just lowered, thanks, from 2:40 to 2:35. So I'm going to have a crack at 2:35.
What's 5 minutes over 26 miles? Come on.
Yeah, that pace. Yeah, whatever. Nothing. Um, yeah, that's 5:55 mile pace for 26
Crikey.
miles. Yeah. So yeah, got a bit of work to do for that. But training is going swimmingly at the moment. I'm probably in just about sub 17 5K pace, which is getting there. Getting there. I need to be about 16:30 5K pace to be thinking about a 2:35 marathon. Um, so yeah, working on that, working on all of the other things around it. I am trying, trying to run that sort of pace. I talk about doing the foundational stuff all the time. Make sure you're doing your easy runs easy, doing um, the right strength work, the right running, the right sessions, all of that kind of stuff. And I'm also doing some other things as well, like a little bit of heat adaptation training, which helps with blood volume and hemoglobin size and oxygen portability and all of that good sciencey stuff. Um, yeah, I'm integrating some biking sessions to get the additional aerobic work in. I'm actually losing a little bit of weight as well. That's another thing that has not been great for me the last couple of years. Whilst I talk about weight not being something people should worry too much about, we certainly don't need to be going down the stick thin Kenyan runner
Mhm.
route. But I have carried a little bit of extra weight the last couple of years. Our eating has been based on stress quite a bit. So
Mm.
I'm really trying to sort of work on that to a healthy level, not any further than that. Um, yeah, and and then after London, I've signed up to the South Downs Way 100.
Ooh, very
Yes,
nice.
yes. So yeah, 100 miler. I'm gonna have a crack at that, and I'm gonna call my shot now. I'm all about calling shots at the moment. So yeah, a 2:35 marathon, and I'm going to the South Downs Way to win. That's what I'm going there for, and Lakeland after that again as well. So
Amazing.
April, June, and July. That's me kind of taken care of.
That'll be really, really cool. Well, we'll definitely all be following you on the tracker on the South Downs Way. No live tracking yet on the London Marathon. I think it would just look like a herd of dots moving through London, but there you go.
Yeah.
Very exciting. Very cool.
Yeah, so that's me. So yeah, we'll talk about that as we go along. We'll talk about your training as we go along over the coming months.
Yeah, it'd be nice. As I say, it'd be nice if I can finish feeling strong and have looked after myself. That's my goal.
Yeah, you will. Don't worry. We'll take care of that.
Fab, fab. All right, so probably ought to introduce what the actual episode is now, or
Yes.
revisit the introduction to the actual episode now we finished gassing.
Indeed. So yeah, we had Harvey Fortis from John Moores University on the athlete hot seat. I host a hot seat with our athletes and sometimes get guest speakers on. Harvey has done some great stuff with John Moores University. In fact, he's about to release a study on female specific nutrition for endurance athletes, and he did have some of my athletes, and Faye was part of the study as well. So we'll have him back on to talk about that at some point. But for now, he came on and answered questions ranging from, just general day-to-day eating, what should we be eating, when should we be eating it to fuel our training. It was brilliant, really, really good. So yeah, without further ado, let's talk about let's get Harvey on. But before we do, I do have to give a shout out to one of our partners. They don't sponsor the episode, they don't pay us or anything, but I do coach Daryl. He's just done the Wendover Woods 50. I coached him to the Arc of Attrition 100 as well. Daryl is the owner of Goku hats, trail running hats. They are beautifully hand designed hats, made here in the United Kingdom, designed in the United Kingdom. So they are a British based company. If you want to avail a special listener discount, you can use maximum 20 on the Yogoku website for 20% off. They are beautiful hats, really beautiful. He actually he also sponsored the elite trail running team at UTMB as well. So yeah, they are great hats. And that's it. Without further ado, let's listen to Harvey. Cheers, Matt. Nice to have you on.
Thanks very much. See you all soon.
Cheers. So, welcome to the hot seat. It has been a hot minute since we've done a hot seat, actually. For those of you I've coached for long enough, will probably remember the last one. I think was just before. Was it just before the marathons? At the end of end of marathon season in the spring. So it's good to be picking things up again, and I am always delighted to have a guest speaker on the hot seat because it means I don't have to do the talking and somebody else can be the one put on the spot. And today I'm delighted to have Harvey Fortis on. Harvey, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, so it's great to be on. Thanks for the invite. It's not often to get the opportunity to talk about these things and people actually listen. So that I'm kind of looking forward to it. So my name's Harvey. I'm a researcher at Liverpool John Moores in kind of exercise physiology and nutrition, and that's kind of been where my work has focused on. I'm also a practicing nutritionist as well, predominantly in endurance sports. That spans across things like running, cycling, triathlon, and then kind of over the last few years as well, delving quite a lot into the scene of ultra endurance as well. So most of my life is kind of consumed by sport, and I think that's a good thing. So now I'm looking forward to speaking.
Yeah, thanks, Harvey. Yeah, I appreciate it. And we got connected because you actually had some of our female athletes take part in a study that you're just wrapping that up, aren't you?
Yeah. So we're just finishing that off now. And yeah, it's been pretty successful. Hopefully.
Yeah, good. Yeah, no, I'm looking forward to. We'll bring you back on afterwards at another stage and talk about that one. So let's get into it because sort of a big flavor for excuse the pun, we are talking about food predominantly here, but I really wanted to sort of try and center the discussion around something that I am talking to everybody about. Almost every single athlete I coach, I am either talking about now or have talked about in the past, is the subject of eating enough. in inverted commas, because it is something that I think a lot of people do tend to get, I would say, on the lower end. Particularly, there are certain times of the year where I would say people just aren't fueling enough, and that tends to be January. It is a conversation I have with everybody all the time, and considering that most of my clients are people that are training for marathons and ultra marathons in the spring, January is not a good time to be losing weight. So yeah, I wanted to sort of really sort of center on the subject of eating enough and how we can really fuel our training, and we've had some great questions that have come from some of my athletes. So before we get into those specific questions, what would be kind of some of your headline thoughts around how somebody can go about eating enough without perhaps having to, go down the route of working out calorie requirements, working out macronutrient requirements, and maybe not even, having to use something like MyFitnessPal. What's kind of your sort of overarching advice around that?
Yeah, I think you've touched on a few good points, and I'd agree the things you've said in terms of people getting this perhaps wrong, and it does tend to be on the lower side for a lot of people. I think, especially on those bigger training days or more intense training days, people do tend to get quite wrong, and actually, if they perhaps overfuel the easy days, if you like. So I think that's quite an interesting habit, and in terms of monitoring that, and I guess what you can do, I think it's not necessary to track your foods every meal of every day through an app of whatever it is. And I would actively encourage people not to do that. I think it's a tool that can be used intermittently for some people, but you delve into some other potential issues using things like that. I think we've got to, we want to encourage people to listen to their bodies essentially, and be connected with that. So I think we're all quite fascinated, I think, in numbers as athletes. So I think we can make the most of these and use them to our advantage by monitoring them. So our performance metrics, maybe in our training, are we seeing what we expect to see? Whether we're building for something, are we building? Are we actually improving? Are we adapting to the sessions? I think recovery is a huge one. I think one of the key things to consider is your recovery between sessions. Are you recovering with kind of minimal soreness, or are there any signs of overtraining? That might be fatigue, irritability, sleep issues. It might be how you're acting completely outside of training and with other people. And then kind of the more obvious things, your energy levels, that's day to day, and in your training, are they consistent? Are they, can you function? And I think with all of these things, it's not just one week to another. I think these things can manifest over a much longer period of time, and we can get 1 to 3 weeks, a month or two doing things quite wrong. We've got to track things over a period of time, and listen to that. I think obviously body weight, whether we as someone who tracks that or not, again, that might not be for everyone, but that's another thing we can monitor. Is it stable, or unless we are intentionally looking to kind of reduce body fat or perhaps increase muscle mass, is our body weight kind of staying stable? That's a great indicator that your energy intake is matching what you need it to. So practical, I guess, tips is listen to your body. That's more easily said than done, but like, are you actually hungry? And if you are you actually hungry? And I guess like taking those kind of cues and kind of feelings as just that something maybe needs to be kind of changed because of that. I think keeping track of how you feel. I always leave space for people I work with every week just to share their feelings and thoughts. It might be absolutely nothing to do with what we've gone over or planned for that week, but just leaving some kind of prompts around their training, their energy levels, sleep, their function, and things like this. over time you can start to pick things apart, and working with a coach or just yourself, noting it down and going back to it over time, you can maybe see some patterns. I know, for speaking for myself, our recall is pretty bad. I will often recall things much better than they actually were. So if you've written it down and you go, actually, there's a theme here, that something's going on, you may be able to uncover some things. And I think like at this time of year, there's a lot of illnesses going around as well. And I think that's, if you're getting every single one that is going around your office or whatever it is, then that's perhaps something to consider as well. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting what you say about, listening to your, those bodily cues, are you actually hungry? Because I find that a lot of the time, sometimes I'll personally mistake hunger for actually I'm thirsty. I haven't actually drunk enough water today, and actually I shouldn't be reaching for the treat cupboard. I should be reaching for a glass of water.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
think as well, training can, for some people, kind of counterintuitively actually suppress your appetite a bit as well. I think a lot of people might go out for a while. Often actually on longer stuff, they come back and they're actually not very hungry for a while. So I think it's in those situations where you kind of use your kind of common sense a little bit, or just a bit of thought in that actually, you've done something, regardless of if you're hungry, you need to kind of kind of counteract that, and maybe go against what your body's saying a little bit in some kind of nuanced kind of context.
Yeah. Well, let's get into some of the questions. I'm going to go with one that I think it was Rebecca sent me, which I thought was an absolute belter.
Okay.
Where is it? How is it best to balance a calorie deficit for weight loss alongside adequate daily fueling for running, exercise, and recovery? So, how is it best to balance a calorie deficit for weight loss alongside adequate daily fueling for running, exercise, and recovery?
Yeah, I think that's quite a useful question for a lot of people. And I think maybe the first thing to answer there is, should you do it, or is it possible? And I think a lot of circumstances, yes, it's doable. You can reduce your calorie, that kind of your calorie intake for weight loss whilst maintaining your training quality. It's just being a bit smart around that. So I think the first place you'd want to kind of consider and put some thought into is making that deficit moderately small. I think a general ballpark would be 300 to 500 calories a day. And this is just to promote a more gradual fat loss without compromising your training, but obviously also your health as well. Whereas more aggressive deficits, which are sometimes warranted for one reason or another, the kind of nutritionist in me would do everything to avoid those situations, because they can impair recovery, increase illness and injuries and things. I think it's setting out your goals and acting on them ahead of time. And I think you alluded to January being a bad time maybe for some people to do that. So maybe now is a good time, actually.
It's funny. I've just had this conversation this week in one of my one-to-ones with an athlete I coach. He's an ex-bodybuilder, so
Right.
so in his head, he was saying, well, as I get closer to the marathon, I want to really sort of cut
Yeah.
my body fat so I'm as lean as possible for the race itself, which is another conversation to be had around how lean someone needs to be. But actually, I was explaining to him, actually, it's kind of the other way around. Obviously, closer to like a bodybuilding competition. Yeah, you want to be like hardcore calorie deficit to get as lean and shredded as possible. But in a performance context, endurance context, actually now's a really good time,
Mm.
because in those months after Christmas, we're gonna need you to be fueling your training, and and not be in a calorie deficit. Certainly not
Yeah.
an aggressive one.
That's a real shift, actually. You're kind of transforming from two different sports, but there's two
Yeah.
massive different behaviors there as well. And I think if it is something you're looking to do, I think there's a few things you can really focus on. I think timing is maybe one of the most important things to consider here, as in times of your kind of food. And obviously by reducing the calories, we're reducing the amount of energy that we're giving to our body. So essentially we want to use and spend that energy wisely. So simply think of it as giving your body the energy it needs when you need it. So incorporating probably predominantly carbohydrates around workouts, both before and during, when you're going to actually utilize it. And then if you're going to train in quick succession, or you're training one evening and then following morning, then kind of feeding post exercise too. And here you'll be able to manage your kind of fueling for your training quality, whilst also being able to not dig too much of a hole and recover, whilst also cutting calories from maybe the less active parts of the day. I think as well, and another really important nutrient to consider is protein. Either maintaining this, or more likely actually trying to increase your protein intake during a deficit can help us perhaps preserve the muscle mass that we have, without kind of eating into it too much, whilst also acting as a kind of quite satiating food. So it makes us feel fuller for longer. So it might counteract some of those hunger feelings. And a general number might be somewhere between 1.6 to 2.2 grams of grams per kilogram of your body weight. So if you times your body weight in kilograms by 1.6 to 2.2, you'll reach a total amount of protein that is quite adequate in these phases. I think as well, as I kind of mentioned before, is actually not over fueling your low intensity or rest days as well. Actually kind of you can reduce your intake on those days, and kind of fueling when you're essentially needing it, maintaining kind of protein and fat intakes fairly consistently, and then kind of adjusting and manipulating the carbohydrate kind of around the amount of work we're doing. So more kind of intense or longer days, and less on the easier stuff and the rest days.
Yeah, but not running fasted. I'm hugely against running fasted.
Yeah, I think
no need for it.
Same page. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think as well, we're on that as well. I think if there's a difference between running fasted sometimes and running without carbs as well. I think always get something in if you can. It doesn't have to be extravagant or something you're going to post on Instagram, which looks nice and fancy. It just needs to be something you can get down you and out the door.
Yeah, 100%. Yes, yeah, I've had this conversation on hot seats before, and on my podcast, and yeah, there is potentially an occasion or two where people could run fasted, but I just sort of say, unless you're working with somebody like yourself, a qualified nutritionist, I would just avoid it. There just isn't really that much call for it. So yeah. Okay, well, look, you mentioned the P word, protein. So I'm going to ask you this protein question. It's a really specific one, but it is a good one in an ultramarathon context. And it is a substrate that is starting to find its way into ultramarathon fueling products. I mean, I've actually got a box of NAC products here. They're disgusting, by the way. But they do have 2 grams of protein per gel, which you just don't see in any other product. So the question that was sent across was from George, who is doing the Arc of Attrition in July, which is 100 miles along the southwest coast. And he says, does consuming protein during a longer effort improve performance? I guess longer effort is subjective, but probably broken down into 50-mile plus.
Yeah, I think we can obviously define what performance we talk about, but I think there's a serious place to using it in some of this longer stuff, and it especially more so 100 miles and upwards, depending on how long we're taking. I think not just protein, but all nutrients, macronutrients are gonna have a role compared to something that's much shorter and probably more intense as well. I think the best way to kind of think about it is that in a lot of these events where we're working for such periods of time that we've not just got to focus on what we're doing in the exercise session, but what we're missing out on the entirety of the day as well. So we're trying to, if we're doing something for say 24 hours, for example, or it could be a bit less or a bit more, we're trying to hit those macronutrient targets that we'd try and hit probably on a normal day, plus the kind of the carbohydrate and the kind of substrate replacement as well.
Mm.
Um, in terms of protein, I think there's becoming a bit more theories around it. I'm not sure there's hard evidence to suggest it does this or that, and that's just due to it's difficult to do a study that people will run on a treadmill for 100 miles.
Yeah.
But essentially, we're going to, when we look at what fuel sources we're using during some of these events, the longer they go on, the more kind of contributions from different sources we're going to have, irrespective if we're feeding. And at some point, we're going to have some incorporation of protein. Now, when we're sat around here or exercising on a normal day, that we will be using some protein, but it's going to be very small,
Yeah.
maybe 1 or 2%, either, very small. And that might just begin to increase as we kind of work for longer. So where do we want to get that from? Do we want to get it from the protein we've got stored within our bodies, which is predominantly in our muscles? Or do we want to get it from external sources, which would be something like a gel that's got protein in, or a shake or something? And I think that's the way I see it. I think it's got value to sustain effort and energy provision. Maybe start the recovery processes whilst we're on the move, which you don't need in those lower events. And if we're racing multiple times a year, or we just enjoy training and not feeling terrible, then we might want to recover a bit quicker after the race as well. So I think it's got a place. I think it doesn't need to be loads. I think a small amount regularly, like you got 2 grams in there. I think kind of 2 to 5 grams, maybe an hour,
Yeah.
will be perfect. And I think again with all of this stuff, obviously give it a go beforehand, find out what you get on with and what you can tolerate, and yeah, take your own notes on how you feel after using it.
Yeah. No, it's that figure of 2 to 5 grams is exactly what I've heard. And the longer an event goes on, the more protein we are going to need to access. And if we're taking it from our muscles, then we're inducing muscular breakdown, aren't we? The longer we go into a race, if we can get it from elsewhere. Personally, I like a pork pie, middle of an ultra. Fats, protein, carbs, salts, everything you need.
It's a staple for a lot of people, isn't it? It goes against what we give people in labs, but it happens in the real world, so must do something.
Yeah. Cheese sandwiches is another one I do quite like. Good. Okay. So let me go back to the questions. And this is a great one actually, because I was listening to a podcast where they talked about this. So, carb loading. I know we're kind of going around the houses here, but I think all of this does actually fall under the banner of how do I make sure I'm eating enough? So carb loading is, a time where we need to be making sure that we're eating enough, so we've got enough glycogen to do the race that we're doing, and actually some of the training we're doing. So, is carb loading with liquids as effective as carb loading with foods?
Yeah, that's a good one. I think in short, like liquids are an effective way, and they do work. I think there are a few things to consider, but practically speaking, your body doesn't necessarily tell the difference to what's getting on board. And I would always encourage people to use liquids within their strategy, not rely solely on it, but use it quite cleverly. I think when we think about what they are, they're typically quite quick and easy to take on board. They're really practical. You can make up a few drinks in a matter of minutes, have them on the move if you're traveling, or doing whatever you need to do the day before a race. If you've got to register or do whatever, you can carry them around with you quite easily. They're also going to be low in fiber and have a high rate of gastric emptying. So that simply means it'll get from your digestive system into your bloodstream and into your muscle quickly. They're less filling, so adding like a carb drink with a snack is essentially like free carbs, and subjectively it can feel a little less heavy, shall we say? Which can also be kind of subjectively and psychologically a lot better as well. And the obvious thing here as well is it helps with your hydration as well.
Yeah.
Assuring you're not doing it too aggressively and overhydrating. There are You're going to get that benefit as well. And I think there obviously are some caveats. Do not rely solely on liquids, but add it into your strategy. I think generally a carb loading is a really good topic to talk about, and it's something that isn't done very well a lot of the time. And as a result of that, it gets a bad rap from people, and that they don't need to do it, or it causes several problems. But that's just due to it maybe not being done particularly well.
Yeah.
It's not just a big meal the night before, but it's also not just eating more. It's eating more carbohydrate in the right types, not increasing fat and protein as well. It's just simple foods that aren't gonna stay in your stomach for too long, and can help you hit your targets and ultimately build up. Like the guidelines are 8 to 12 grams per kilo of your body weight, but start at 5, get to 7, and then work your way up and practice it in your training.
Exactly. That was the key thing I was going to say was, when I'm coaching these, all these lovely people I work with, it's about, right, practice your carb loading before your next long run, like a mini carb load, basically.
Yeah.
It's not the full blown 2 days of eating Haribo's. But, let's maybe change from, all of that whole lovely healthy food, which will come onto that, the whole paradigm between health and performance. And maybe in the afternoon of the day before your long run, switch to the more simple things, your white rice, your white breads, your white pastas, and and simpler stuff. Maybe snack on some Haribo's in the afternoon instead of nuts, that kind of thing.
Absolutely. Yeah, you're going to get better at doing it. You'll get more accustomed. You'll actually know what it looks like. So regardless of the physiological benefits of practicing it, just you'll know what to expect come the day. So you know what food you need to have.
Yeah.
And also probably a benefit your training the next day as well.
Exactly. And just staying on the point of the liquid carbs piece. So I did hear on it's an Australian podcast, Fueling Endurance. I can't remember the guy's name now, Alan something. But he was talking about utilizing maltodextrin powder, because you could put like 50 grams in a liter, 50 grams of maltodextrin. Oh no, what was it? Oh, no, 50 grams of maltodextrin per 500 mils of water. So if you do that and it's tasteless as well.
Yeah.
So if you do 2 liters, that's like 200 grams of carbohydrate for free.
Yeah. And that's kind in your stomach.
Yeah.
Interestingly as well, it's kind of relevant. I recently took part in a study looking at carb loading, and they basically gave you 3 different trials at low, moderate, and high carb load rates. And the way they blinded it was to taste match drinks. So they gave you like a standard amount of carbs in your food, and then they taste matched the drinks. You had a low, a moderate, and a high amount. And it was actually just a really effective way to handle that volume of food. And like you'd get to the end of the day, you'd still be kind of hungry, even though you've had 700-800 grams of carbohydrate. And I think just generally it's a wise move. And yeah, hopefully it's something that we'll see a bit more of.
Yeah. So, little segue there. The whole health performance paradigm, and it is actually a question that's been sent over. Actually, just sorry, before we move on to that, just on the carb loading piece, a question that Sam, who our coach has sent across, was at what point does the weight increase of carb loading become counterproductive? And I know the reason he's asking this, because before his most recent ultra, he reckons he was about 4 or 5 kilos heavier at the start line than he was, a couple of days beforehand.
Okay. Yeah, I think obviously everyone's got their own experiences and things, um and yeah, that will affect things. But I think generally, we're doing something that's it's functional weight, if you like.
Mm.
So we will always see an increase pretty much in your weight when we do a carb load, and that is simply because we we store carbohydrate with water. So every
Mhm.
gram of glycogen is stored with 3 grams of water. So that is completely normal to see that, and it's simply just water weight. And that we usually see more beneficial effects from this than negative effects. And whilst we may see typically 1 to 2 kilos of increase in weight, which obviously has its differences, it's not usually counterproductive. This is all functional. It's going to contribute to your energy production, and you will end up using it. And when you burn it, you will essentially lose it, and you'll utilize it for your movement. I think where we might see people more inclined to do it or think it's worthwhile would be in hillier races, whether that's cycling or running and things, and that's due to the obviously the thought process of your kind of power to weight or carrying your weight up a mountain, which then is probably higher intensity, so you're using higher amounts of carbohydrate as well. So again, is functional, and I think what we've got to present or question is the kind of the caveat would be you run out of energy,
Mm.
or you don't have enough energy, and simply when you don't have that, you can't sustain very high intensity effort, so you will just be brought to a halt. And I think we've all experienced that feeling, and that's something we want to prolong. And doing a carb load is an effective way to prolong that. And I think again, if you get on horrifically with it, then it's just trialing things in your training and then making a bit of a judgment call, speaking to people, and finding out, yeah, what is best for you. But generally, I think it's um, functional weight, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I remember when I interviewed Marcus Wilday from Talk. Yeah,
Mm,
he said to me, he said, if you've done a carb load correctly, you should be stood on the start line roughly 2 to 2.5, maybe more kilos
yeah.
heavier than you were um, before, yeah, before you started. So yeah, Sam, don't worry, it's nothing to worry about, and it's certainly not going to be something to worry about in terms of like it's not fat gain. It's not like
No.
it's not useless weight, like you say. It's that water that's being
And we lose a
used.
lot of weight when we do these things, don't we? Through
Yeah,
losing or using carbohydrate, but fluid as well. We do sweat a lot, so we your weight at the beginning is going to be different at the middle and at the end, but it's getting you to those points.
yeah. Right. So let's go on to that healthy eating performance paradigm piece that I alluded to there, because it is a big one. It is one that does worry people, particularly of a certain age, like myself, and a lot of the people on the call and I coach. I don't coach sub-elite 23-year-old male athletes. I tend to work with parents, people who are generally over 30, and north of that. And at some point in our lives, and in fact, for some of us, it's how we got into running was through like a weight loss
Yeah.
program. Um, and through those weight loss programs, you are kind of hammered with, you've got to eat healthy, eat greens, and healthy, healthy, healthy. Um, and all of that is super important. But when it comes to marathon performance, ultra marathon performance, it gets a little wacky, doesn't it? So the question that was asked, this was by Mark, uh, who's doing the York Marathon this weekend, actually. Um, how would you recommend balancing healthy eating versus the need for the high sugar, high carb food before intense workouts? Like, i.e., how bad for us is a packet of Oreos before a speed session?
Mm.
Um, and then he goes on to ask, how unhealthy do you consider ultra processed foods to be?
Okay. I guess to answer the first part of the question, I would put an argument forward to suggest that a diet with the processed foods is the healthy one for an athlete. And probably more effective and practical as well. Should you eat processed, highly processed foods all the time? Absolutely not. But any good diet, athlete or not, should fundamentally be formed of whole, real foods, aiming to eat an array of natural occurring colors and textures is something that, I think is a great starting point and is a really good cue to have in your mind if you're at the supermarket or you don't know what to do for dinner. But the inclusion of those processed foods, and I think by processed we're probably talking about like kind of high energy dense, like calorie.
Haribos, Oreos, all the
Yeah.
stuff that I constantly talk about. Yeah.
Those things are going to be more often than not beneficial to an athlete in the right context. So by consuming some of these foods that you might perceive as bad, or as you say in the question, high of sugars, either before or during an intense session can provide you with the energy that your body needs, and it's not going in and sitting in your body; it's getting used. You're actually going to use it
It's a
during the work.
totally different concept, isn't it?
Yeah,
If you're sat there and you smash let's use the Oreos as an example here.
yeah,
If you sit there watching Netflix and you smash a whole thing of Oreos, which I
yeah,
have been known to do, that's a very different concept for your body to handle compared to going out on a 4 hour long run
yeah,
an
yeah.
hour later.
And I think you touched on a good point, kind of leading into the question in people's maybe reasons for getting into the sport are often different to where they end up, and our beliefs might change, but we're still quite similar to those initial beliefs, and they're really difficult to shift. They're very deeply ingrained in us, and I think you mentioned the study with that some of your athletes got involved in. A huge finding from that is that conflict of what people perceive they should do versus actually, what is good for them, or isn't often what they think, and it's a really challenging thing, and it's because it's wrapped in lots of emotions, and eating isn't just okay black and white. We're consuming nutrients, but in a three-dimensional world, it's much more than that. Where it's actually a behavior, it's social, it's enjoyment for a lot of people. So
Yeah, it's emotive, it's religion, it's
yeah,
it's all kinds of things, isn't it? Yeah.
I think we've got to maintain that. It's realistic as well. That's where we live in, and sometimes actually, whether you're an athlete or not, having some food that you enjoy is fine. And I think we see them. Well, I do anyway. Really regularly at the minute, the list of things we shouldn't be eating is increasing so much. And I think when we then shift who we're talking to here, and it's athletes, it's active people, those guidelines in which these beliefs are formed of aren't made for these people anyway. We don't refer to the NHS government guidelines for physical activity, which is 150 minutes per week. We don't refer to that when we're training for 100-mile race. So why should we have referred to the kind of the food guidelines as well? And yeah, I think on just to wrap it up, I think on kind of processed foods, and it is something that is getting increasingly talked about, I think, with kind of documentaries and things, vilifying them a little bit. It's actually something I will recommend to athletes pretty much daily. They're effective to actually allow our athletes to eat enough to reach their energy needs. If we're relying solely on whole foods, it can be a struggle to achieve. It might result in you missing a meal, under fueling, and that could manifest over a few days. Almost everyone, I'm sure, by the sounds of it, that you coach is training alongside many other things as well. So a quick bar or a drink might be the realistic and a reasonable thing to consume. I think yeah, it's something that I'm quite passionate about because it's really like harmful. That
Mhm.
that some of these messages are gaining so much traction. And I think it's just using the right sources of information to kind of base your practices off. And sometimes you can just do what you want to do as well sometimes, and feel okay about that, and not have too much guilt wrapped in that. And I know that's much easier said than done, but it's 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 like a bit of food, and it's there to be enjoyed and to to offer good things and not, not bad things.
Yeah.
I like food anyway, so
Yeah.
yeah.
And I do get where these kind of questions come from, because I have been there. I was
Yeah.
overweight at one point, and I did go on and I've tried various diets,
Mm.
keto, carnivore, vegan. Of course, I've gone right through the whole spectrum of them, um and it can be quite hard to lose some of those beliefs around, sometimes I'll stare at a gel and go, this is really fucking bad for me. But
Yeah.
you know what? I'm not sat on my ass watching Netflix anymore. I'm actually stood, on a running track, and I'm about to do, a session with, 60 minutes of very hard intensity running. So I know this is going to be good for me, because it's
Yeah,
going to,
it's really complicated, and I can completely understand where it comes from. And I think you're in a position yourself where you probably give people advice, and you've said there, you look at the gel and you think, oh, I'm not sure I need it, whereas you do, but even so, there is that conflict, there is that inner battle, and that's only normal. And I think it's kind of just trying to break through that a little bit and coming out with the right kind of conversation in your head at the end that, like you say, actually I do need it. And
yeah.
that's yeah, that's positive.
Yeah. And I think it's just really important just to kind of circle back to, um, what you said at the beginning there, that, that whole foods, that what is deemed as healthy foods is absolutely important. At no point are either you
Yeah,
or I or any good nutritionist or running coach saying, you need to live off Haribo's and Oreos. Absolutely not. You
yeah,
know, I had a delicious whole grain Greek wrap with olives and lots of lovely stuff before I came on the call.
yeah,
Tomorrow it's my session day, and I mean something I'm playing around with at the moment is very high carb fueling. And I've done my last few sessions with 140 grams of carbs in a 1 hour session.
wow.
I feel amazing for it. Like
Yeah,
absolutely running, really super well for it. So, but I know my body is using it there and then. It's not. And I'm also cutting a little bit of fat at the moment. I've lost about 3 or 4 pounds in the last month or so. So don't
beautiful.
fear it, folks. Don't fear it.
Yeah, well, cool.
Right. So next question. Um, there. Right. So this was asked by Lakes. His name is. He's my ex bodybuilder. He's actually the second of two ex bodybuilders that I know, coach. The other one finished his first 100 miler on the weekend.
Well done.
Yeah. So he asks, how important is blood testing for monitoring key biomarkers like iron, cortisol levels, calcium? I mean, I could reel off loads in running, and how can it inform training and recovery strategies?
Okay. Yes, that's a good one actually. Essentially, how important of it, and I guess we should probably ask the question, should all athletes or should everyone get tested? Um, it's not essential for every athlete all the time by any means, but it can have its, obviously benefits in certain scenarios. I think if we just consider when it's useful for now, and then we can kind of circle back to its use in maybe informing recovery and things. But I think when our symptoms of, if we kind of are present with symptoms of any sort of deficiencies or overtraining, this might be fatigue or poor recovery, frequent illnesses, drop, a noticeable decline in performance, all things we've kind of covered earlier. This might be a good time to kind of consult for some blood work, and this can identify obviously deficiencies. You mentioned obviously there iron and vitamin D, but also those kind of hormonal imbalances, so things like cortisol. And I think if we consider who we are, and some people are going to be perhaps more likely to kind of keep an eye on this types of things, and One of those might be really high performing or elite athletes, and they are just because they are constantly pushing their body so hard and for so long, or even if you've just got an extremely high training volume, or just trying to push those kind of limits of performance and avoid that overtraining. Female athletes, I guess in particular, and with if they've got a history of any kind of menstrual irregularities or fatigue or any symptoms of kind of low energy, or REDS, relative energy deficiency in sport, which is a conversation in itself. But yeah, these people may benefit from regular monitoring, especially if you've got a history in these things. And that again might be things like, looking at sex steroid hormones or iron, which can be kind of quite low in certain females. Older athletes, perhaps, if you're obviously with aging, certain biomarkers like testosterone or those sex kind of steroid hormones in women do naturally reduce. We see things like vitamin D as something that we want to monitor in the winter months due to the lack of sunlight. And I guess just on the kind of aging athletes, there's an increased risk of things like muscle loss, injury, when these things are kind of are running quite low. So I think regular testing for some people is beneficial, but I think unless you have no symptoms of overtraining, fatigue, deficiencies, then regular blood testing might not be necessary. Ultimately, for most people, and not everyone by any means, but for most people, a balanced diet and good kind of training and recovery is going to be enough to keep you in check. But again, if you've got any concerns or just want to know more about yourself or just querying these things, and obviously speak to your GP or a registered dietitian. I think it's important to say most of these things are my thoughts, and there are people out there who can obviously be a bit more clinical in this. You mentioned about maybe informing your training and recovery, and it might just be that certain markers like cortisol or certain inflammation markers or low iron are signs of athletes overtraining. So blood tests can inform decisions as coaches and as nutritionists to reduce the training intensity and volume for a period of time, maybe increase certain delivery of nutrients. It might be iron, if that's low, and then monitor that and kind of treat it as an injury, I guess, and rehab that back into play. Obviously, the obvious kind of response if you're deficient in something is to supplement with it or increase it in your diet. So there is actionable things you can do. On performance, I'm not entirely sure for most people what would benefit, but I think when we value our health in its performance effect in that healthy athletes and athletes training consistently, then it will have an effect that way. And yeah, I think it's something to consider. It's if it's something you want kind of doing and checked, then by all means speak to a GP, and you can get it tested every year. It might be if you need monitoring, it might be every 3 months. And tracking it over time is a great way to understand and characterize a certain individual, as opposed to a one-off test, which is informative numbers, but they're just numbers within a scale at that point. When you track it over time, you can begin to characterize people and see if something's a bit above what it should be or a bit below where it usually is, and that's a little bit more useful than a one-off measure.
Yeah. And you can get them commercially available as well, and there are some good ones out there. There's also some shit ones, but I mean, if there's one thing I would say, if anybody is thinking about getting a blood test done, particularly when you're talking about inflammation markers like creatine kinase and things like that, you've got to be a bit careful about when you do the blood test. Because if you do the blood test like the day after you've done a hard run or race or a long run, your inflammation markers are going to be up naturally, but it doesn't mean they're chronically up.
No, actually, that's a good thing.
It's actually a good thing. Yeah. Yeah. We hear like again, it's another thing, isn't it? It's like we could go down a rabbit hole here, inflammation, bad, 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 bad. But actually, in a performance context, acutely,
Yeah.
inflammation's good.
Yeah.
You
I
know,
think that's it. It's those little words like acutely or chronic is they get missed, unfortunately, but
yeah,
that's what matters.
yeah. Cool. Okay. So yeah, if you want to get your bloods done, folks, then have at it. But make sure you get them checked by the right person
Yeah.
before you make any changes, is what I would say. And particularly when it comes to supplementation, which is another rabbit hole we could go down. Yes, that was it. That was a good segue for this next question, actually. The question that this is Rebecca again who asked this. So, in looking for like lunch and breakfast options, what is actually better for your body and training? One of the nutritionally complete liquid meals in inverted commas, like like a Huel brand or something like that, or is it better to just have a likely less nutritionally complete but normal food based option?
Yeah. That is a tricky one. I think if we're talking everyday type scenario here, I think maybe understanding that every meal we have doesn't need to be like nutritionally complete, if you like.
Yeah.
It's more what we do over time or over a day, over several days. Um, I always think that there's so much benefit of eating food, regardless of its, you know, a lot because of its nutritional value, but because of other things. Um, maybe the social component or simply just treating your food as that, if you like, and eating it. I understand that that's an idyllic world in some people's lives at some point, and that sometimes a drink is going to be the right choice. It might be if it's the difference of you having lunch versus not having lunch, then by all means, absolutely go for it. I think that's a no-brainer. Um, if you have the option to have the food, then I'd sway that way. I think there's benefits in whole foods that we might not see in drinks, and it might be any brand of drinks, but there's an element of not necessarily knowing what's in it, and do we need all of those things at one time? I
Mm.
I don't know. I'm not saying you don't, but I don't think you need everything always. Um, but for some people, it probably is a great addition to their diets if it's really lacking. But but yeah, I think it's to supplement a diet, and to use it when you really need it, I guess, if you're really time crunched.
Yeah.
If not, we get so much good stuff from food. I know things like Huel has fiber in it, but we probably get more fiber from a meal. We probably get other stuff that's just in our whole food, some micronutrients, some kind of phytochemicals. It could be,
Yeah.
polyphenols or whatever it is. And I know a lot of this is in some products, but to me, it's just getting it from the source makes sense when you can. But it comes to that, I guess it comes back to processed foods again. It has its place, and if it's the right time and place, then yeah, go for it. But that's not, I guess, the time
Yeah.
and place isn't always and everywhere.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. I mean, for me, I'd always go with the food option, but if like I was really in a pinch, like when I was working full time in a corporate job,
Mm.
and I'd go and get my, I'd be in the office, but I'd go out and get my run done at lunchtime.
Yeah,
I was due in a meeting in 5 minutes, and it was a case of smash down a sandwich and probably get heartburn, or just drink the Huel in the meeting. Sometimes I would grab a bottle of Huel, but would I do it, lunch and breakfast every day? Probably not.
but I was in an airport the other day, and the options they had there was like horrific, and that's a point where you go, okay, that might be the better option here.
Yeah.
So it's in certain scenarios, it's going to be your best choice.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, on the subject of breakfast,
Yeah.
so Chris asks, like, what is the ideal time to eat breakfast before running a marathon, ultra marathon? Is it 2, 3 hours before and then a snack 60 minutes before the race? What would you be kind of advising? Let's say Chris was a client of yours.
Yeah, I think the place I'd start is 3 to 4 hours before the race, for your main breakfast, if you like. And I think some people we have eaten all the way up to the race, little and often. But I think that bulk, get it in as early as possible. This then brings in the question of the practical element of that. How early do you start? If it's a 6 a.m. start, then you're waking up. If you're getting an extra hour in bed, then okay, that might actually be better,
Yeah.
pushing your breakfast back an hour. But yeah, I think around 3 hours or so. And I try and, as a ballpark for people, would match the amount of hours with the amount of grams per kilo of your body weight. So if it's 3 hours before, around 3 grams per kilogram of your body weight is a good place to start. Or at least strive for. You might still be hungry, so you go more. It might be not for you, so you reduce it. But as a general guide, I think it's a good place to start. And then I think like hydrating well before a race is going to be really important as well. And that might be someone and a time where we want to incorporate something like electrolytes, which is like a lot of things, another conversation in itself. But that's going to be probably a good incorporation there in the morning. And then listen to your hunger, I guess, and if you are hungry, make the most of that, take advantage of it because it's going to benefit you in the long run. If you really can't stomach something, which is very normal when we wake up early, especially when we've not maybe practiced it or we've got particular nerves for a race, then don't just stick to your plan because it's what you planned. You can reduce it, you can adjust it, taking in more liquid calories, something that's not got a lot of fiber in, a lot of fat in it. It might be, we see increasing people go for something like rice or like a rice pudding, just because it's
Yeah.
fairly easy. And I know that is probably not what we see traditionally in ultra running. I think that's its own beast of a sport. But yeah, I think kind of utilizing those kind of quick digesting foods. And then I'd typically be looking to get something in the hour before as well. If you can get something small throughout, but then within the hour before, and that will be something small. It could be 20, 30 to 60 grams of carbohydrate. And that will be when we're utilizing probably more nutritional supplements. It might be a gel, it might be a drink, it might be a banana, just something that's going to be easy. And I'm not opposed to something right before, like 10 minutes before, 15 minutes before. And that's just simply to, something really high sugar, not much, maybe 20, 40 grams. It just increases the amount of sugar that's in your blood, but essentially it will get into your blood, increase once you're starting, and then you're tapping into it straight away, essentially.
Yeah.
And again, just practice this because some people do have that real response to eating close to exercise where they then feel very low in energy. They go a bit hyperglycemic because they're so responsive to it. So yeah, train with it. And I think if you're doing things right anyway, you're probably incorporating that into your like the speed session that we discussed earlier. You might be doing that before that anyway. So it kind of comes second nature by that point. But
Exactly.
yeah,
I think that's sort of where I would sort of circle back to from with my coaching hat on is, whatever it is you're going to eat before your marathon, you should be eating the same thing you've been eating for the last 10 long runs you've done at
yeah,
about the same sort of timing. And so yeah, that would be, like just to sort of give myself as a bit of a example here, my go-to pretty much before any long run and race is cinnamon bagel with a boatload of jam, because of the fructose getting in the liver nice and quickly, because that's what we're looking to do on the morning of race
yeah,
day, right? We've done our carb load the day before. We've got 1,600 calories worth of calories worth of glycogen in our muscles. The other 400 is going to be in our liver, but that has been depleted overnight. So we're just looking to replace that. So that's me cinnamon bagel and jam. And then I'll have a gel, as you said, literally 10 minutes before the race.
yeah. I think that's good. I think it shows you don't need to, you know, throw the kitchen sink at it. You don't need to go crazy. If you can tolerate it, then okay, it might work for you. It might be a good thing. But if you do a good preparation the day before, then like you say, including some fructose that's through jam or honey or fruit juices in the morning, that's gonna gonna kind of do what you're wanting to do in that morning, and kind of get you prepared. So yeah, just envisage how you want to feel on the start line, no matter how that looks, and try and get yourself there with your fueling appropriately, and choose foods that allow you to feel that same feeling. I think you're onto a winner.
Good. Right, we're nearly there. And this is a big one. So this is another Bex that I coach. And she is asked, interested to know what or if the differences are or focus should be for women versus men for fueling.
Yeah, that is a big question, and again, I probably could talk
We
about
could go on a massive.
cut me off when and as you need, and let's get probably send a few people to sleep now. But yeah, I guess to start off, my answer probably isn't going to be as clear cut as people want it to be, and it's not as clear cut as I want it to be either. It's not sitting on a fence, when I try and lean on evidence, it's hard to do that when there's not a lot there. But from what there is, and there is some, and from experience as well, just working and speaking with lots of female athletes, there are some things to note. And actually, as you kind of mentioned earlier, this is the topic of my research at the minute, so I am interested in it, and it gives me no pleasure to give no proper answers, and I'm trying to do better with that, I promise. But I guess a few things that we can note, with what we do know, is that women have a tendency to utilize higher rates of fat than men, and I think that's probably circulated in quite a lot of circles, and that knowledge may be spreading quite well now. But as for during high kind of intensity or race intensities, females are probably still utilizing higher rates of carbs. So it's not to suggest that because they have a tendency to utilize higher fat at moderate intensities, to suggest that they need less carbs during racing. We simply couldn't say. I think then when we think about women who have a regular menstrual cycle, if they're not on contraception, they're premenopausal, the cycle has been studied to some degree, and it's, whether that's its effect on fuel use, for example. So the cycle's generally divided into two phases: the follicular phase, the first phase, and the luteal phase, which is the second phase, the later phase. And this is separated by ovulation either side. Now, hormones like estrogen, progesterone fluctuate during these phases, and they're the things that could influence things like our metabolism, so our energy use, how much nutrients we need. Unfortunately, it's not that clear cut, but there is some dividing suggestions. I think for now though, like, although we don't know things, this doesn't mean to ignore it. And I think this is the really important thing, is that a lot of people say, okay, there's not a lot of evidence, we don't know this and that. And whilst that's true, it doesn't mean that we ignore it as a topic in a conversation. It's to do what we can do. And I've spoken to Faye actually and other people about this. And I think, if we can track an athlete cycle, if they can track it, monitor it, how it affects their training, their mood, and all these things, then they'll better understand how it affects them and their needs. Some people there might be pre-menstruation, they might be full of energy, great to go. Other people will take a rest week that week because historically they know that's the wise thing to do. And actually during that period, we see an increase in our energy expenditure actually, which is just just like kind of like the 5 to 7 days before the period, and that's simply due to that increase in progesterone, which requires more energy, and then that can increase our energy by up to 400 calories a day. So that might be a reason people get hungrier. So might affect our fuel strategies for that. Obviously, there are other women, and I'm conscious not to ramble on too much, but who aren't obviously menstruating, they're on contraception, they might be in or postmenopausal, and these are obviously things to consider as well, whether they take anything to kind of combat that. And again, that's things just to monitor. I think anecdotally we see some elite women consume some really high rates of carbohydrate and some really like they rival and match what males do. So it suggests it's possible. But in conversations, I guess there's and just in some of the work I've done before, there is some cultural and societal differences between males and females, which might be different during different stages of life as well. And these are going to impact our behaviors, which are as important to I guess what our needs are as well. With younger people being exposed to more and such different information with medias and different types of media. And then we kind of go through the lifespan, people's focuses might change from performance to more health or menopause. And I think these are things that we must kind of consider as different kind of phases and considerations. Broadly speaking, I think what people do, females typically have a tendency, I'm not sure your experiences here, to underfuel. I think guys do this as a lot too, but I think particularly before and during training is when women are, very broadly speaking, neglecting their fueling. And this comes all the way back to the conflicts between beliefs and the actual kind of need to fuel. And there's a huge mismatch actually in what people think they're doing versus what they're actually doing. And that's, I think, something that's quite interesting. And if you listen to people, a lot of the time, if you were to take their words as gospel, you'd think, okay, perfect, you're doing everything right. And then you take the information and then you say, okay, actually, there's a little bit of work to do there. So I think tackling those issues is something to target as well. But yeah, we'll hopefully have some better answers for you and some numbers to put to that. But I think it's not a great answer, but if we think about what we'd recommend one man do to another man, they're going to be different because their experiences, their ability, their practices, their ability to handle fuel might be different. So it's almost certain that the same is going to be for females as well. It's just categorizing those thresholds, those guidelines to give them a better ballpark to start with. Does things like body mass impact how much we can take on? A 50-kilo athlete versus someone who's a bit heavier. Is that a limiting factor? I guess we don't know entirely. That we're led to believe no, but I don't think it's that well understood just yet. But I'm not sure your thoughts on that either.
Yeah, no, it's as you know, I met a former colleague of yours, Kirsty, in
yes, yeah.
When I was out in Colorado for the USCA Running Coaches Conference. She was one of the speakers there, and I mean, first of all, I would say it's interesting because we've just had some conversation on our athlete group chat on the Maximum Mileage WhatsApp group about the lack of studies that are done within the realms of performance sports, endurance sports, or just sports in general that involve women. I alluded to it earlier. I don't work with sub-elite 25-year-old male athletes who, unfortunately, that's where a lot of the studies tend to be derived from. They're the ones that are being studied. So, thank you for putting together a study that is geared towards the female physiology and nutrition, because it's desperately needed. And I think we are years away from getting, the real meat and bones of the answers that we're looking for. But Kirsty, who is a specialist, I mean, literally, she spends her entire life working on the female, the female reproductive system. That's the word I'm looking for, and how it plays into sports. And she was talking about like she works with Olympic athletes, for example, and she'll have like Shelly-Ann Fraser Price ask her, when should I be ovulating so that I can win the Olympics? It's just not as clear cut as that. None of it is as clear cut as that. A, because we don't have the data, but B, because there is a lot of still some of the stigma side of things around, in fact, I think Faye mentioned on the group that it's actually quite expensive to get women to do some of these studies. I'm not entirely sure what the reasons are behind that, but so actually what sort of came out of the discussion with Kirsty was, whilst we think this and we think that, and actually a lot of the time when it comes to the different phases of a woman's menstrual cycle, it should look like this, and you can track it on an app, and the app will tell you that you should be at this point, and this is how you should be feeling. But actually, when they've done some of the studies, the graphs of where people's estrogen levels and things were just all over the place. It wasn't anything like what it was supposed to look like. So it's so hard to say, you're a woman and you should be doing this exact thing at this exact time differently to men. So actually what came out of that discussion was her saying, try not to think too much around treating your athlete as, oh, that's a woman athlete and that's a man athlete. They are athletes that all have different needs. And the women I work with, I encourage to just kind of, when they say, well, I feel I'm at this stage, what should I be doing with my training? Well, I always go back to how do you feel? Like, do you feel like you should be training? Do you feel like you should be doing that session? If the answer to that is, well, I don't feel great, then well, no, don't. It's fine. Move on from it. And so it is a tricky one.
Yeah, I think again I could do a whole episode or a chat on this really, but it is getting better. I think is a good thing to kind of say as well. It's not all doom and gloom, and
No, not at all.
there is things coming, and I think it's a great sign for the sports as well, because there's untapped potential there. I think I'm right. I read it before the Olympics, but that was meant to be the recent Olympics was meant to be the first with the equal gender split. So I think we've only just got there. So there's a lot more to come to come from performances and what else as well. So it's exciting, and hopefully it's sooner rather than later, I guess.
Yeah. Harvey, thank you so much for coming on. We could go down a major rabbit hole with a lot of this stuff, but I think some of the highlights for me are, and it's stuff I talk about all the time. So, and in fact, actually, Mark sent me, when he sent me his question, he said, I know you've talked about this, but it'd be great to hear it from the horse's mouth, so to speak, a nutrition expert. But I'd say like a fairly kind of simple framework, for want of a better word, is around the days and times where you're not training hard, perhaps it's an off day or an easy day, really use that opportunity to focus on, your good, healthy, whole foods, plant-based. That doesn't mean being vegan, although if you want to be vegan, then be vegan. But certainly, really focus on eating a wide variety of good foods. And then when it does come to your harder days, then switch the attention to, right, I need those carbohydrates because that is the fuel. And actually there was a very good, what's his name? Ignacio Salaman, I think it is. He's quite a big endurance sports researcher. You probably know the name I'm trying to say. He put a thing on his Twitter yesterday of no matter what intensity we are working at, there is no, at an easy intensity, you're burning fat. And then when it gets hard, it's carbohydrate. Actually, they found that no matter what the intensity, you're burning carbohydrates, even actually at quite a high level, even at a very easy intensity. So get them in you. Do your hard session. And then when you've done your hard session or your long run or your race, then you can go back to all those whole grains and good healthy foods.
Yeah, I can't speak to a group of people without saying a mantra that's come out of LGMU, and it's fuel for the work required. I'm sure you've heard that before. If you've not, it's a fancy way of saying eat what the body needs. And I think that's a great way to kind of approach this. And it can be very complicated. There can be loads of confusion, but it doesn't always need to be for 90% of what we're doing.
Yeah. feel for the work that was required and the adaptations you're looking for. That's what I say.
Yeah, that's a nice addition. We can maybe update that.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you, Harvey, and thank you everybody for coming on. And I'll get you on again, Harvey, because we got so many subjects.
That's really good. Thank you. Thanks for entertaining me.
No worries. Thanks a lot.
Thanks for listening to the Maximum Mileage Running podcast.
You can find more out about us at maximummileagecoaching.com. If you think you need help with your running and you think that either myself or Faye could be the coach for you, then drop us an inquiry. No obligation whatsoever, and we'll have a chat with you about your running. And there's plenty of resources on the website as well. And don't forget, you can join us on the Maximum Mileage Running Podcast Facebook group. Until next time.
See ya.
Bye.
Bye.